Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Real Life Mages. I'm very excited to see you again. For those of you who are new, I'm Stephanie Forcier with Creators on the Crest. I'm an intuitive counselor and tarot reader. And today I have a really special guest, and her name is Tarah Green from Tarot and Palm. She's a partner, a mom. She does both tarot and palmistry and is very skilled with that. So we're definitely going to link her information down below for those of you who'd like to get in touch with her. But we first met online, actually, and there was a recognition of some similar path work for the both of us. We came together through, I think, just a mutual community of friends and colleagues having to do with freedom and breaking free of the structure of government. And we also realized that there was this spiritual component and that we were both into tarot, and we've done like an Instagram live together before. And so when I started this podcast, I started sharing it out with all my friends and colleagues, and you were like, oh, that's so cool. But what was really neat was that I had been going through my own process with, wow, how do I describe to people how I think about my own spirituality? Because people like words to describe things. And I'm not a big fan of labels, but I was just thinking and kind of daydreaming about it, really, and determining where do I land in all this. And the words eclectic pagan popped into my mind. And not a day later or so, I was catching up with my friends on TikTok, and I saw one of your videos titled Eclectic Paganism. And it was, I think, just a short that you talked briefly about what that meant to you. And you have amazing videos on TikTok. Everybody should come check those out. They're a lot of fun. And you do readings there and all kinds of fun stuff. So I was like, oh my gosh, like I have to talk to her more about eclectic paganism, because it was literally something that had popped into my mind, and it's obviously in the energy field. Even if people don't know exactly what we're talking about yet, I think after they listen to the conversation, they're probably going to be like, oh, okay, I definitely can vibe with that. So let's get into it. Tarah, first of all, did I miss anything in the introduction? Is there anything else you'd like to share?
That sounded pretty complete to me. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this conversation. The way that our beliefs have evolved we have a similar path where our spirituality has some common themes as well as our freedom.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Our inherent freedom. You got it. So I'll have you kind of start us off. So you made that video on eclectic paganism. How did you get to that? What does it mean to you?
So, yeah, finding the words eclectic paganism was very liberating for me as well. I feel like with some people, it's like almost like it's like a diagnosis that helps them kind of like explain their symptoms. But this is spirituality. So it's like, I mean, they relate. But so eclectic paganism for me has this deep journey, and to have those words feels really liberating. To have a sense of identity and words to describe our spirituality, because in the world that we live in, there are mainstream religions that dominate and they fight with each other, and we look at world history and wars and these large religious group thinks that have tried to be like, no, it's this way, no, it's this way, and forcing it upon each other. And then ultimately what had happened throughout history is the pagans, the non-mainstream people, they like, and this is my story personally as well, like these beliefs, they have been stomped out through these mainstream things. So paganism, it's the earth-based, the old ways. And for me personally, I relate that to my own childhood and the spirituality that is inherent within children, the magic, the imagination, the way that we connect and we see things and believe things in a different way, the faith and the inherent inner knowing of a child, the gnosis within child. It's beautiful. And so as a mother, that's something I'm sure we both, it's so beautiful to see that in our own children and remember that within ourselves as we connect into the identity of our own spirituality. So in my journey as a child, I can recall having a very strong connection to what felt like what the words were given to me was God, in the Christian religion that I was born into. And so for me as a child, I always had this deep inner knowing and this sense of connectedness and magic and inherent the beauty, the Holy Spirit, the life, that there was something special about this existence. There was more to it. There was an inner knowing. And as I grew up in the Christian church and the religion, I started hearing these things in the Bible and that this was the word of God and that these were the stories. And it didn't really always line up to my heart and my gnosis, my inner knowing, my intuition as a child. And there has been this journey with liberating that voice and liberating that inner knowing. And in our society with language and word, the way that culture has evolved, there has been this occulting that has happened, this hiding of the mysteries of religion. And so I think this inner knowing it can be in all of us. And as a child, these constructs were being given to me in the Bible. And some of it I really vibed with. Some of it I really would like, like the things that, oh gosh, like I loved the Proverbs. Even Psalms were pretty interesting and beautiful and really got me thinking. But Proverbs were like, I was really into the Proverbs. I definitely resonated with a lot of like Jesus, but I prefer to use the word Yeshua now, but that's the word I was given as a child. And this all relates into paganism. Oh, we could go so deep. I love to look back at language when we look at beliefs and things. That's a fun side offshoot. But back to just getting into the core of it, I would read these words and they would just not always make sense, and I would question things. But the church, the patriarchy, the man, the pastor would want to silence my voice and tell me, I personally was in a Southern Baptist church for a large part of my Christianity, and not to put labels, everyone's an individual. Every Southern Baptist church could be different. Every individual is different. But the pastor that was there had this view where I heard him speak so negatively of children and teenagers. He just was always like complaining of teenagers. And it goes deep too, because it turns out of his like 14 children that he had adopted, one of them that was my age, a teenage girl, it turns out he was like being her behind the closed doors. Not to just get so deep, I just went so deep, but I just want to say, like, going deep with this full authenticity. So the church was corrupt. I was seeing this corruption. I was hearing this pastor negatively speaking about teenagers and me and his own children, that he like so was looked at as a saint for adopting and fostering. And I was confused, and it was like cognitive dissonance and me trusting my inner knowing in this battle of them trying to silence my like questionings. And then eventually I became a teenager, and I think I just numbed things out. I got into drinking alcohol, etc. I kind of just partied and just like tried to ignore this for a bit. And then come my late teens, early 20s, I could feel some major shifts happening. And I was like coming back into like, what am I? Who am I? What are my beliefs? I took a deep, desperate dive into the core of Christianity that felt good to me. And I ended up getting married and then divorced. But through this process of having a Christian, like I was in a church and this whole process, this ritual, this initiation for me and the government and the law, and just like it was just such a strange experience for me, but coming into who I was and my inner knowing allowed me to kind of eventually, I had to shed all of my constructs. So I was chronically ill. I was depressed. I was in this marriage that wasn't right. I was surrounded by a really toxic, dark Christian belief system. And that's not to say that all Christians are that way for anyone listening. I just want to say that everyone's different. Every individual is, I think, that's why we've got to be careful with labels. All eclectic pagans are not the same. All Christians are not the same. But there was just so much, for me, there was so much darkness in what had surrounded me in my community, that book, my pastor, and these are just little aspects of the story. But of like the pastor who was very corrupt and was putting out this word that it was like one way. And it just all furthered me into being like questioning, like, that doesn't seem like that is what is love and true and right and God. And for me, there was a point where I kind of threw it all away to see what would stay. And so, chronically ill, depressed, I didn't know if I was going to live or die. It was deep. I just, I found myself exploring magic. And oh gosh, it saves my life. I would go into the woods and I would have a fire and I would sit in the silence, the rain. I would feel that on my skin. I would be alone. I would be naked. I would be howling at the moon. And like, I was like, wow, there's something to this source, this God, this divinity. It's real, it's there, it's powerful, it's beautiful. And I was shunned by my community. They threw me out and they said, if you're not in this Christian box, you're evil, you're bad, you're satanic, you're, And so from there, I actually really want to credit the internet and technology and social media. I was on Tumblr a lot and there was hashtags. And so I started exploring certain hashtags like paganism, witchcraft, magic, permaculture, freedom, anarchy, these sorts of labels. And I would just talk with people about their ideology, and I would read things. I would go deep into these rabbit holes and look at things from a place of, I can trust myself and my own inner knowing to look at the evidence and take in, not just what somebody told me, but what I see as a whole. And that there is a way to have a personal relationship with whatever is greater than us, source, Holy Spirit, God, whatever words you want to call something greater. But I really credit this to the earth and to nature. For me personally, as I came up through that childhood and teenage years of conditioning around Christianity, and then I came to just the wildness and the liberated freedom of being and observing the oneness of nature, and just like recognizing that we are a part of that, this breath of life that exists in the beauty out there, it's within us. And that here on this earthly plane, it's an interesting place. We are in this dualistic world. There are laws of this universe, and we're like a facet to the greater, to the all. And we're experiencing this through this one little lens right here. And these lenses are amazing. Like, we can throw the lens of tarot on to view things, or the lens of palmistry, the lens of these, however it is that we need to look through. But I feel like that was a lot and that was pretty deep. But for me, like, nature and going into that and just finding this like connection. Like I recall a powerful life-changing time when I thought, you know, I didn't know if I was going to live or die, and magic and this connection, God, whatever you want to call it, brought me back to life, and I threw it all away to see what would stay. And that was it for me. And it came back and it was like, okay. And it was this whole process of the eclectic, of really allowing myself to look at things without the previous lenses and programming that I was given as a child through certain religions or whatever worldviews, the schools, etc., the government, whatever it was, the worldviews. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing so deeply and powerfully, because I too have a similar, there's some differences which I'll speak about, but there's a similar theme here. And I think a lot of people that are going to be watching this are going to be able to have their own version of the theme. And the more authentically and rawly we can express our journey, the more it gives that permission to others, and it helps us, and it helps everybody we're talking to as well think about different aspects of what they've experienced and give it importance, because this is part of evolution. This is how we evolve. And to be able to come together and you and I have this conversation, even though there are some differences that'll come up through the conversation, the point is that we open it up and we allow it to be okay, because we both grew up where it wasn't really allowed to be even asked,
Mhm.
without some sort of consequence. So I think it's very important that we go to this depth. And there's so many directions we can take this, but I'll just share too that as a child, I remember having realization of what Christianity taught me at the time was God. That was the label I got. Now I would say maybe natural prime creator or something like that, something along those lines, because I do believe the words have vibrations, and God has kind of been taken by
Yeah.
by the mainstream and by Christianity and utilized. But I also am going to be open to people who use the term God, because I know what they mean. And I feel that, I could utilize my own intuition to sense what that person is meaning, right? The times where I felt as a child where I was most dialed in and connected to natural creation was when I was in nature. And a lot of the natural, innocent awarenesses that I had about being a spiritual being as a child were sitting in my backyard, like being on the ground in the grass. I can almost take myself back there to the way that my backyard looked, and being and playing with the grass and weaving it and getting dirty in the dirt. And those were the times. Or out having a hike. I was in the Girl Scouts and we were always hiking and camping and things like that. And it was those times where I felt at peace because I was dialed in to the greater, the greater all. The natural element is definitely a huge part of this. And I think that was one of the things that, for me, kind of had me question things. So my path, I actually grew up in the Methodist church, and the pastor was my father. And so, at least at the time, Methodist, I would say, if I'm kind of analyzing religion to religion, a bit more progressive, more open than the Southern Baptists of the time, or at least the branch that you spoke of. So there was a very loving approach that was being taught by my father and embodied in his life and in the life of, even my grandparents, and possibly even before that, right? But the ancestry goes way back, which we'll get to in a little while. However loving that was, and on the whole, I had a pretty darn good childhood. I mean, free of abuse, I was always fed well. I had, I had everything that I needed. We weren't necessarily like wealthy. My parents were in the service industry, a teacher and a minister. So it was pretty modest, but at the same time, luckily, I was raised pretty damn well and in a loving environment. When it came to the issue of God, however, I had a lot of questions. So I was obviously expected to go to church. First of all, like when I walk into a church, every church has a smell. Like buildings, they smell, a lot of them are older. They just have a certain smell. So right away, I wasn't as connected when I went to a physical church. And then being a sensitive person, which I was kind of partially aware of as a child, but I still had these expectations upon me. So I would walk into, and I'm bombarded with everybody in the church's energy, loving, not loving, addiction, I'm getting it all as a child. And so a lot of times what I would do actually when I was younger, when I got to the age of maybe like 12 or so, I started just helping in the nursery because I much preferred being around the kids. No offense to my late father, who's passed, may rest in peace, but I wanted to be around that energy. That energy was easier for me to tolerate. So I was in that nursery quite a bit, helping the attendant in the nursery. And I was quite rebellious, I'll say, when it came to around that same age of confirmation. When myself and two others my age were going through the confirmation process with my father, that's when I really started questioning, okay, wait a minute, like you say God is this, but then there's this, like this isn't adding up, this doesn't make sense. And my father actually got mad, almost kicked me out of the confirmation class because of the questions I don't think he really knew how to answer from the perspective that he had at the time. As I aged and grew, this was a big point of, identity for me, right? And finding my own identity. And in my astrology, I have a rebellious kind of nature anyway. And so it kind of led to me going off. I went off to college. And during those years, I was, of course, met people that had grown up in other churches, other religions, Episcopal, Pentecostal, Baptist, all of it, right? I was around people from different backgrounds. So I tried to go to different churches. That was one of the things I went through. Like I tried all these different denominations to see if I was missing something, because this was my time of like gathering information. This was my time of working with the information. I didn't realize it at the time. I was seeking my identity. I was seeking something. But at some point there, and I lost myself too. I lost myself for a while. I mean, I smoked weed all the time. I was like, I was just out. Cannabis is natural, it got me closer to nature. And that worked for a while until I kind of couldn't deny that I had to do it fully on my own. What helped me the most over anything was when I surrendered and I let go and I said, okay, I'm going to have my own connection with source, creator, whatever word you want to put to it. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know what the details of this are, but I am surrendering this. I'm going to stop looking for it here. I'm going to stop looking for it there. I'm going to stop looking for it over there. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to figure out where it is. And that's where I found the peace. That's where I found my connection. And it always took me back into nature. So I've heard lots of people who have been in the religious structures and then they come out of it and they choose a different path, say, well, nature's my church. And that resonates to this day. That still resonates with me. When I'm in a natural environment, in the woods or hiking close to the water and with the elements, it's profoundly all encapsulating for me. It's healing, it's rejuvenating, it's connecting. And it's interesting because in our society and culture over the eons, we've been pulled farther and farther away from the natural world, but we're nature, we're connected to it. So that's where I really found that inner knowing. And we're talking like maybe around my Saturn return, like age 28 and on. That's where I really surrendered. And I started working with beliefs one by one. I'll just take something, I'll look at it, I'm going to observe it, I'm going to analyze it, I'm going to let it ruminate, I'm going to see if this is something I keep. And I found in all the religious globetrotting that I did, I was able to pull out an essence. And I believe you referred to it as Yeshua, or some people say the Christ consciousness or whatever, right? Because in everything that we experience, there are elements of truth. They're the truthful essences in it. And so if you can, like a surgeon, you go in and you extract that essence, that's where, you know, I can bring it into my heart. I'm like, okay, I'm extracting this piece. I'll bring that into my heart, but I can leave the rest. I don't have to live up to these expectations. I mean, it was a hell of a journey, because we're talking about, this was a very personal relationship. My father, my physical father in life, you know, and here's me coming back to my connection to the all and to the earth and how she supports me, and realizing that relationship. And it really was a graduation from childhood into adulthood, that whole progression. It really was a spiritual graduation of sorts. And I'm still sorting through things. I think everyone's still sorting through things. And we're going to allow that to be okay. That's a part of this journey. That's a part of the evolution of the journey. But yes, so you and I both had the very, very personal experiences with that. And it's very interesting how the natural world and nature came through for both of us.
Yeah, it is. Wow. I resonate with a lot of your experience as well, and I think that's so interesting that your father was the was it a priest or a pastor, was it called?
Pastor.
Pastor,
Yeah.
right. That's we call it pastor as well. And I, as a child too, like we used to go to a different church as well before that one. And I ended up exploring different denominations in my own journey as well. I remember doing like there was a few different ones, and like they debated on a trinity or a unity, or just like these little details. There's just subtleties, and you know, or they really focused on baptism or just different things. But I, as a child, remember I loved like reading the Bible and preaching, like, and I used to play pastor, and I would like read the Bible to my mom and like read it and want to be like a priest. But in my, you know, in my upbringing, it's like a woman could not be in a position like that. And I find that so cool and interesting that you're a descendant from a pastor, which you mentioned you even have a further lineage. I'm curious if that's continued, because you have this deep inner knowing. And I think that if we look at our ancient history and our ancestors, and we look at there was priest classes in like Hindu religion, or the wisdom keepers, those who had a closer connection. And I'm like, you know, some of us just intuitively find it. We're not like born into a tradition where it's passed on. But I know that pastors, often their children become pastors, and that's a thing. And I know that you're a spiritual leader of sorts, in a same way that you are, I would consider you like a priestess in your work with counseling and tarot. You know, a pastor is like a counselor, and in the community and in church, I think that it would be a natural thing to like go to the pastor for, you know, wisdom or counsel, and in the same sense, like,
Yeah.
because that person has a closer connection, or they're regularly cultivating with the divine, and so you go to them because that's their expertise. In the same sense with you, and with what I do as well. And so I think that's really cool to look back and be like, wow, I always wanted to be a pastor. And I feel like I'm not far off. I did become in a sense, a priestess, one who holds the space for the thresholds of life as we go through those portals in this experience.
Yeah. It was a real relief when I did allow my own connection to creation and to nature and the divine. That's when I saw it. I really saw it within my dad. Even though the path he chose, I find restriction in myself personally when I allowed that to be okay, for that difference to be okay, you know, that's when I was like, oh, and I was able then to understand that my dad, and the reason that I chose my dad was because of his heart. And even though he had a dramatically different way of, living that out in the world, it was his heartfelt approach to things. It was his heart-led charisma and attention that he gave others, the space he held. So again, it's like I was also able to take the essence of the man, my father, the man, the beautiful things about him, and say, wow, that's in me too. I just express it differently. I just
Yeah.
have a different way of expressing it. And no one else needs to necessarily agree or understand that except for me. And it was the element of peace within, it was the relief I felt that told me this is alignment, and you're on the right path here. You're on the right, you're on it.
Right.
Mhm.
Wow. Yeah, that's really beautiful. It's like your father may have had the constructs that can be restrictive mentally, but his heart was really true. And so even in that framework, he was able to do a lot of good works and hold that space for the community, just as in the sense that you do with now just an evolution. Like, I think that we're continually evolving, and so with so many generations, maybe it was way back in the day our pagan ancestors being oppressed, to now us becoming more liberated, and each generation taking a step further and further. And your father, maybe his heart was more connected than his, fathers and fathers before him that had the framework or whatever given to them. And so we're continually breaking these ancestral patterns, becoming more and more connected. And it's like returning to the old ways, but also cultivating the new ways.
I sometimes hear that described as like the ancient future, like returning to the ancient future, because and that's the eclectic piece of it, is bringing those wonderful things from the past and blending them with what we've experienced this time around, and somehow bringing cohesion to that, and still allowing ourselves to be on the journey of evolving and changing and growing and learning new things. But the ancestral part that you bring up, I love this. This is really important, because one of the interpersonal things that I did when I've come to all this was really to sit in blood codes, in my soul codes and my blood codes. And what I mean by that is it's the part of me that makes me this animated Stephanie today. It's those deeper things, and it's through those codes, and it's a very personal journey for each person. I have a way that I connect in with that. It's through that I recognize and I connect on that spiritual level to my ancient ancestors who weren't Christian, right? They weren't at the time, indigenous at some point, right? If we go back, and I can connect into that, and I can bring forward those elements that I cherish and that I can blend into just naturally how I work with my own spirituality. And there's an element in it, and if you look up the definition of paganism, it talks about, religions that have the natural ritual components, right? And so I blend that in my own way. I have my own way of working through rituals with the elements. Like you said, the fire, you mentioned that. But talk to me a little bit about when you connect in with your ancestry, and this may not even, because a lot of people don't even know exactly all the branches that their ancestry takes unless they've done a lot of research. But when you connect in with it on that deeper spiritual level, what are some of the awarenesses that have come to you?
Yeah, wow. Ancestry is one of my favorite points of connection to explore. And so, yeah, if that interests you, I've made a few videos on this as well. So check them out. Ancestry for me and the blood codes is very relevant. It's very important for a lot of us. This can help us explore our eclecticness, our history. human history is so fascinating. And I think it's important to just acknowledge that history is often told by the victors and those who are in a position of power. So there can be a lot of like digging that is required, as well as critical thinking and not just believing the first thing you see or hear and really feeling into it. And then also being eclectic in the sense that you will resonate with some things and not others. And it's okay to evolve and to be like, wow, I can accept the wisdom of my ancestors and leave the rest, or whatever that is for each part of us. And with bloodlines, I also find that it's fascinating that so many of us, we're related. We all trace back. We have common origins, the human species that we are now, the different interbred and related tribes, the old pagan tribes, the humans of the earth that we have evolved from. They were more connected than most people even realize. We can look at points in time in history where these resets, ice ages, ice floods, the Great Flood, which is a thing that is told in all religions and spiritualities. We all hear about the Great Flood and these ways of humanity kind of sprouting up, and how the gods or whatever, they come here and like, you know, the knowledge that is given and shared. I have explored many spiritual paths, you know, starting with, of course, Christianity, branching out with different denominations as well, to then finding paganism. And then from there with the Ancestry, there's so many different branches and flavors of paganism, which means old, you know, the old ways, the earth-based spirituality. So for me personally, I have done genealogy and ancestral research to understand as far back as I can, as well as DNA. I've personally had like a DNA saliva test because I was curious about what that would tell me. And based on my depthful research, I can tell you that there's so much more that they're not telling us when we look at those tests. And I find it so interesting to look at the history and the way that populations have come overtaking different areas and just going back to the common things, the common themes that we're seeing. So me personally, just a little share on my ancestral and my eclectic beliefs. So much of what I was already intuiting, I would discover as I was researching my ancestry. I would be like, whoa, I've seen that symbol. I dream it. I've drawn it 1,000 times, and that's a symbol now that I'm finding is like in my ancestral lineage. Wow, like these sacred symbols have meanings that actually are common. We can look at even the indigenous people of the Americas that we live here in this land now, and that there's commonalities with their indigenous spiritualities and those of Europe and of Africa and of Asia and like India and everything. There's these common themes that we can also intuit, that we can know. But yeah, the ancestral thing, you know, and then we have the future generations that we can collect and pass on this wisdom of our heritage and of our. So with my ancestry, I have things from the Scotland area, Scottish area. And so for me, I've researched the history of those lands. You know, we often hear about the Celtic people representing those areas, but there's really so many more. There's, you know, you hear of Gaelic, the language, and there was the Gaels. Language is a fascinating way that we can trace things even more in depth, and our language now is like made up of a mix of so many different ones. And then we can go back to like ancient symbols, so we can look at the Scottish Isles and we can see some of the oldest we have these like megalith ancient structures all over the world. They're everywhere. They're here, they're there. So we look at these old symbols and we find different people buried, different tribes, different, you know, like all sorts of. So there's just evidence of thriving ancient cultures and societies with religious and spiritual beliefs centered around the elements in nature, the four directions. That is, for example, I know that that's common here in the Americas, the four directions, but that was so common and celebrated amongst all cultures. It's so sacred. There's crosses, you know, 4 directions in ancient symbolism of all times. And then there's those structures, so many of these ancient structures built in alignment with the stars and the sun and the moon. And the, you know, it's epic and beautiful to see that our ancient ancestors, they didn't build those structures by coincidence. That was by design. And they knew that there was this sacredness. And I think that brings me into touch on this other point of the sacredness coming through nature, which I wanted to bring up was like animism, the idea of animism, which everything that is animated and alive contains essentially like the Holy Spirit or the essence of like the breath of God or the life of source or creator. And I love your term natural prime creator. I was looking at the word prime like in Latin. It's just origin, like it's the, you know, and it's very much like source. So natural prime creator. It's like that's really all encompassing.
Yes, I have to credit George Kavaslis for coming up with that term, but it really encapsulated in a more digestible way for me to describe the relationship for me personally. I've heard other people use terms. The thing is that I can tell, like, because I have that inner knowing and that intuition always tells me, well, even if they're using a slightly different term, I usually know what they're talking about. And if I don't, I remain curious, right? I remain curious and I can ask questions and go into that. But the animism piece, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because that to me, I think I refer to it, and this is just, you know, again, a play on terms, but the higher force. So when I'm recognizing that spirit in something that's animated, that's that, like you said, the breath of God, the Holy Spirit, the higher force. So many different terms that can be used to explain the same phenomena, right? And it's really interesting to go deeper into these things. And we could honestly keep going. I think we're going to try to like call it, and maybe we can come back and have another episode. I definitely would like to encourage people to remain curious, remain open. One of the things that has really helped me is to be willing to look farther back and go deeper into myself, into my own ancient history that's contained within me, my body, my soul, and go back further than 2000 and some years. There's been many, many transitions and cataclysms, as you mentioned, and the earth possibly was, you know, all the continents were together and then something happened and they spread apart. And so there's been all this movement. And I just think it's so important that no matter what your heritage, no matter where you're from, as a human, to go deeper into that, to go further back and allow yourself to bring forth all of, you know, the beauty and wisdom that existed throughout the eons.
Yeah, definitely. I love that going back, go back and explore all that. It's so much older and ancient.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much more. I mean like, and with DNA and ancestry, yeah, I'm like a mixed European. There's a whole bunch of there's like I don't know. And honestly terms like Slavic and things like I think they can be misunderstood. And I have some, you know, I have stuff from all over. I have some stuff from down in the Iberian Peninsula. I have some stuff from Ukraine, Poland area. The borders of these countries have changed. So it's weird for somebody to be like, for me to be like, oh, well, I'm Polish or I'm Ukrainian because I'm neither of those things because I evolved from somebody who was there when those borders were different and there was different names. So it is like, yeah, I agree with that. Like keep going further back. I find it interesting to research our ancient humanoid species like Cro-Magnon and then like the Neanderthals and different like there's different types. There's Denisovians, which is another ancient humanoid species. There's a whole bunch of other ones. There's these like miniature human there's yeah, and they come from different areas, and then there's the human DNA introduced, and yes, it could go so deep, but I feel like we'll have to just, you know, get into those later. But I do love chatting about that for anyone who wants to follow my any of my social medias, they're all the same, Tarot and Palm on Instagram, TikTok, all the things, tarotandpalm.com.
Okay. And we're going to
Yeah.
definitely put a link below for people to get in touch with you. And I'm at Creators on the Crest on every platform. And of course, this video will go up on YouTube, possibly some other platforms in the future. But I would like to invite, if anyone has any questions or comments or ideas about what you'd like to hear more about, or what we could maybe go into deeper in another episode down the road. We're busy moms, but we're very open to this kind of conversation. And so inviting all of our viewers to have these conversations with their trusted loved ones and their colleagues and their friends. And this is what being here is all about. It makes this human experience so rich and so vibrant and so lovely. And I'm just so excited for being here and being able to have this conversation with you, Tarah. It's been incredible. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to come on and share so authentically and so deeply with us.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for holding this container and allowing me to go deep with like my depth of passion for the spirit, the natural prime creator that moves me and has given me such great direction and purpose. So yeah, thank you for holding that space. And I hope that, yeah, everyone enjoys this eclectic pagan dip in a little bit about our journeys. I would love to continue this someday, perhaps maybe talking more about freedom and how that ties into the history. I love getting into the ancient history of humans and all of that. So that could be fun.
Absolutely. There are definitely offshoots to this. And that's why, like, share, subscribe, comment. Let's keep the dialogue going. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And I hope to see you all next time.